Hello, world. Welcome to the Shannon Joy Show.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Shannon Joy Show. I'm obviously not Shannon Joy. I'm Paul Stone, CEO of Colonial Metals Group. We're a proud sponsor of the Shannon Joy Show. May have seen me here before. And Shannon thought it would be fun if I filled in with her for her today on today's show. And so we have some cool things in store for you. No magic tricks, no comedy. I tried to arrange that, but the producers shot that idea down. So we'll get into the things that you're mostly interested about, which is how the government continues to screw the American people. And I like bringing, illumination to some of the things that are right in our face. But if we pull the curtain back, we can just see how we, the core of my message, and I think Shannon's values and messages to everybody, that we need to take power back for ourselves, stop depending on things outside of us to deliver the things that we need for a happy, joyous life here on the planet, that we need to be in charge of securing those things. And we first need to be aware of just how we might be, letting it slip a little, we kind of been, in my opinion, kind of sucked into this almost rooting for the government as a team that never wins, but it's the only team that can deliver that wholesome life to us. And that's just not the case. So one of the things we've been talking about is how our government makes decisions decades ago, and they're affecting us today, that the negative outcomes of choices our elected officials have made that set us up for a confusing, mysterious, almost conspiratorial, many would think, arrangement for how our lives have changed. And we're in bewilderment over that. And one of the biggest things I can point to is the construction, the assembling of China. And when we look now at how we, tariffs and angst and agony over just how China is such a bully, on the new bully on the block, long ago in the 80s when all those great movies were getting made, it was the Soviet Union that was the bully on the block. And they really came to the world stage when they wanted to set up nuclear missiles and base those in Cuba. And so we can all remember there's a great movie, I think it's called 13 Hours or 13 Days, where Kevin Costner is one of the chief advisors to the Kennedy administration. And he's, they're going through this hell of, do we set up a blockade? How do we slap the Soviets around without starting World War III? And today, China has taken the Soviets' place. It just kind of stinks that Hollywood's not willing to make movies about it. Like, the Top Gun and all those 80s movies where we're constantly fighting the Soviets and always beating them, of course, would be interesting. But see, that's another part. Like, why would certain elements that used to be so patriotic to America, like Hollywood, turn against us? Why was California the epicenter of our defense industry? And today I'll let you rant on for a second how you would describe the state of California today. Is that a patriotic place? I got to tell you, I've lived there, and I've just never felt like the 4th of July there was like I was part of a state. I don't, when I was there, I just wouldn't feel like the 4th of July, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, that I'm actually celebrating those holidays in a state of the United States of America, one of the 50 states. So when we look at how things have changed, it's easy for us to be kind of, at least, in my opinion, could be wrong. Certainly not everybody has been, but sucked into this vacuum where we've got to fix the government and then we can back to fixing how our lives work. And I think that we can, if we pull that curtain back and look closely, we can see that we can't fix the government. The government is a certain way, and maybe even all central governments have the same track record. When we look at reserve currency countries, and they all seem to, the ones that got that top ranking eventually lost it. And if we look at why they lose it, was it the people that quit being awesome and putting a great financial powerhouse together and just rested one day? All the billionaires in those reserve currency countries finally had made enough money and created enough success. Because when I look around at billionaires, they don't ever seem to reach a point where they chill. They're just constantly, the men and women are constantly after more. And so if the country that came together and greatness was brought about by the people, then what ruined the reserve currency country's position in the world? It must have been the governments. It had to be something. And I remember an old detective I made friends with a long time ago. He was like running the security for the firm I worked for. And I would talk to him from time to time. And he would always just say, whatever the motive, whoever would benefit, the simplest of terms, the simplest reason for why something's happened is always the answer. It's never really all that elusive, even in the most complicated of things. And so when we look back at the assemblance of China, we want to first look at China before anyone was really dealing with them. And for thousands of years, I think the Great Wall was built, I don't want to get this wrong, but 2,500 years ago, or long time ago, way before America. I once was in France and I got to eat in a restaurant, and outside what was special about this restaurant is outside where the name of the restaurant was, it said EST 1608. They'd been serving food since 1608, which is older than America. That's kind of cool. So we also want to think about that too. We're not the oldest country, we're the youngest country on the planet. And so what was China doing for all these, multiple hundreds of years before we came knocking, right? They were exporting rice and fireworks and cheap toys, really, and MSG. So how did they pull themselves up? I mean, maybe China would have been a success story we should be teaching in school. How to be a minority, in a way, of the English-speaking business world and come to dominate right alongside the good old USA. I mean, that would be one hell of a success story. We could look in there and go, how'd they do it? And, what did they have to sacrifice to get there? And where were they genius? And where were they, making mistakes and then learning from them? And what was their ingenuity driven by? And how did they come together as a people? Well, we don't have that success story when we look at China's story, coming from the rice paddies to being a dominating force around the globe. And they certainly aren't catering to greatness around the globe. They're causing divisiveness. They're stealing technology and stealing data from countries all around the planet. And so when we look at how the hell did China come from exporting rice and fireworks, with a $330 billion economy in 1989, and then Tiananmen Square, to a $17 trillion economy today. How'd they get there? We really are not doing ourselves service to understand the root cause of things. We can't run around treating symptoms. Doctors don't run around treating symptoms. You can't rub Olay on your skin and treat cancer, right? Oil of Olay or whatever it's called. I can't just rub dirt on it, like the old saying is for those who've played sports, quit crying, rub some dirt on it and get back in the game. We've got to go to where things come from. We have to understand the source of everything to understand anything. And so when we look at these threats that are poised around the world by China, we got to look at who built China. And that was one of the Substacks I put out a while back. And I'm building on that, but I'm interrupting that story a little bit today because I want to talk about, a lot of the great striving moves that President Trump is making. Many of you might agree with some of them, and some of you might not agree with some of them or all of them. But when we look at the reason why we want to look at China today is because, generally speaking, the threats to these reserve currency countries come from outside that country when the government presiding over that country's greatness grows and grows and grows and reaches a point where it becomes a ruinous beast and squelches out and suffocates the greatness that whatever that country had put together. It interrupts the process. It comes in between the people. And because the government is always at its core seeking power to attain it and then certainly to keep it, it's natural to think that governments would build systems and policies that would try and permanentize. I think I might be making up a word like George Bush used to, permanentize that situation, that arrangement. They do have the power of the pen, and they do have the power of the printing press. And so when you look around at how they're different from the rest of us, they have two things we just don't have. We don't have the power of the pen in a way to make laws, and we don't have the power to print money. They also have the power to withhold. We don't have much of that either. That might be one of the greatest forces in life, is not just the power to provide you with something, but to keep you from something, the power to withhold. So when we look at what Trump is doing today, just segueing for a second away from specifically from China and how it got here, we're seeing unfair trade practices. We've been seeing this forever. President Clinton offered a communist nation favored trade status that eventually became permanent. Congress actually passed this into law in the early 90s, shortly after coming up with this favored trade nation status, which meant there were zero tariffs on anything coming into our country from China. Zero. There's always been, a little bit of a penalty here and there for imports, not necessarily on every import and on every country, but it's been general that tariffs have existed, but not punitive. You wouldn't even notice them, a couple percent on certain things. What Trump is proposing is, in a way, to try and combat and spank China and smack them around or punish them or curtail, limit how much of their stuff makes it into the country. You would want to do that, in my guesstimation, to try and reliven the manufacturing base here, force the consumer here to go, oh, well, those kitchen towels I would get once in a while at Walmart from made in China have gone up in price 50%. I either just won't buy those right now and deal with the ratty ones that I have for a while longer, or maybe I'll take notice that right next to those at Walmart or Target is a set of kitchen towels made in America that cost a little bit more than the China ones, but why not support that American factory? So when we look at what tariffs seem to do, is they try to stop the inflow or the volume of imports coming to the country, because if everything being made outside of your country didn't hurt your economy, then what the hell? Who would care? But it seems to me that the source of a strong country and a free people is to be able to carry around that bullhorn that says we make the best stuff. The stuff we consume here in our country is made in this country. And the jobs and the pride of those small towns that eventually make up the counties and the states and the country itself, that pride, that almost that spirit that flows through a family in a small town, is because they all work together at the same factory making John Deere parts, making stuff for Caterpillar, making steak knives, silverware, making furniture. And they're proud to do it. And it feels good when you're kind of like everyone else. Although, when we're young, we don't want to be like anyone else. We want to move to Hollywood or move to New York. We don't want to live in that small town anymore. But it seems to me that the heartbeat and the strength and the health of a country would be that there's a constant reason for pride, something to be proud of, and almost like, hey, we're doing pretty well because everyone's doing the same as us. And there's not much difference between what Dad makes and what Mr. Smith makes and what Mrs. Johnson makes, because everyone's kind of in that town is working at the factory. And we don't envy the banker for getting a new Cadillac every 6 months. We don't envy the factory owner who, might have his own plane or her own plane. We don't envy that because they went and did some things that put them in that situation. We're cool working at the factory. We're cool having our brothers and sisters that live nearby, our town folk, just doing the same as we're doing. We're all in the same life raft together, and we're all dealing with life's challenges together, and they're kind of general. They come for all of us. But when those towns die because the factory went overseas, then the country loses that heartbeat. It loses that unification and that pride. It loses the ability for mom to be a mom if she wants to and not be forced into the workforce. Now we're raising crops of kids that raise themselves, latchkey kids. That phrase didn't exist in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It didn't exist in the 1200s. It didn't exist when Christ was walking around the planet. It didn't exist when the Egyptians were around. Latchkey kid. So our government, our elected officials chasing after more of the resource of money have made decisions that not only caused a communist country to come to power, it has caused us to have to fight with that power today. And we're pretty limited in how strong we can go at them because they make all of our stuff. We're a 70% driven, spending driven economy, not making stuff anymore and exporting that overseas. We buy stuff here. The movement of money is no longer transactional from the way that we make stuff and sell it here. It's that we just consume stuff made elsewhere. And that's weak. That's extremely weak. That's a dependency, just like a drug addict hopes to hell his dealer just constantly stays in supply. It's a dependency that's a sickness. It's an unhealthy situation. It's certainly not a position of strength. China has that strength now. They're the ones they're the factory to much of the world. India, Mexico, some things made in Vietnam. But when we look back real quick at why Trump has to throw tariffs against this country, try to use a tool, not necessarily a great tool, because they can throw tariffs on stuff that we sell to them, or they can restrict, essential ingredients to life or the corporate world, like chips, medical stuff, medical technology devices. The technology might be invented here in Europe, but the machines are made in China mostly. And so when we look at how trapped we are, we're seeing one of the things that Trump wants to do, which is bring common sense and strength back to America. And you may not agree or might be worried about the approach he's taking, but it is a limited set of options. What we want to always keep in mind, as I started talking and I try to illuminate on every show I go on, is so governments can do this and that, and they can start wars. We've been lucky that the only war fought on our soil is the Civil War. So it's kind of uncommon or maybe unreasonable to think that Russia would want to have boots on the ground and take over America, or China would want to take over America, because while the money printing is still continuing in our country, we're the strongest creator of liquidity and financial horsepower on the planet. If we aren't buying the stuff made in China, they aren't making anything. But if it were to come down to that loggerhead, if it were to come down to that stalemate, in my opinion, China has the best situation because they've only started walking out of the rice paddies for about 35 years. So they're used to, and much of their country is still used to, and probably fine with living in the horse and buggy era. And we're so far away from that. I'll never forget once I was when I was living in California, they ran a commercial for the county fair, and there were some waterfowl in a pen. And the young daughter tugs on her mama's shirt and points and says, "Look, mama, chickens." And it was ducks. So we're kind of far away from, the way a third world country lives. We're really far away from that. And that's something we got to worry about. So as a country, our economy could easily go into the ashes. But as an individual, we don't have to let a situation like that destroy us too, because there's two economies, if you will. There's one that's driven by our hunger in the morning, where we're going to figure out how we're going to earn that financial resource to buy food, or we're going to decide how we grow it ourselves. So that is the thrust for economic activity where you and I live. It's that hunger thing. Like how much food, how many days of food is in the fridge or in the cupboard? A week, maybe a little longer. You got some of us watching today might have deer meat frozen in their freezer in the garage, right? But even frozen stuff doesn't last for years. And we, used to our sophisticated choices for menu options, we get tired eating the same thing day in and day out. We want variety. We're used to that. China, can be used to very simple food items, rock soup and rice, very simple, and, stuff from the sea. In my opinion, from reading it a decade ago, is what the Monroe Doctrine, the spirit of that would be. And a lot of countries could read that and go, you guys are a bunch of arrogant pricks. I mean, you just think that just, if there's minerals in our dirt, you can just come do deals and dig it out and ship it back to America. But that's, if you're looking at the first democracy on the planet, to ensure that it never gets snuffed out, as we expand, we have an expanding need for resources that we may not find here. And also, doesn't it make sense to use yours first rather than ours? Because if you run out, at least we still got something in our dirt that we can dig up, like oil and minerals and things that aren't renewables, if you will. So doesn't China have its own idea of a Monroe Doctrine? We're silly if we think that they don't get it. They may not be doing things in the way that democracies benefit and capital markets benefit from, which is the seeds of, we fail our way into success, right? We'll miss every shot we don't take. So when we take a shot and miss it and it's embarrassing, it could have been the game winner, we go to the game tape and we learn from our mistakes. My theory on where Japan went wrong and where Soviet Union went wrong and where China will go wrong is they seem to have this honor system where instead of uncovering embarrassing moments or failures or errors made, they just supplicate, which is, you take a 12-inch blade and you stick it in your stomach and you move it from left to right and you're out. And you take that embarrassment onto yourself and make the ultimate sacrifice. We learn from those mistakes. And that's what makes us strong. Our diversity, learning from how others live, learning tolerance, patience, and love is a unique set of circumstances, making America a unique country, a strong people, when we don't have a government that's doing what it's doing today. So I want to take a break for questions here in a minute. So let me just draw some of these things together. Governments, people sailed here on wooden ships all long ago and made America happen. A government didn't sail here and set this place up. And then we were so enthralled with what they'd created that then we started coming over from Europe, leaving the monarchies and religious oppression and the inability to create something for ourselves. We would have just been raking wheat, and our kids would have raked wheat, and their kids would have raked wheat, and there's just there's no great opportunity for upward mobility in life, financially speaking. And so we left all that behind because we left governments. The colonists, Colonial Metals Group, tries to remind people of actually the spirit that burns within you if you're an American, even if you're one of the hikers coming from South America all the way up to the Rio Grande wanting to be here. To me, those are just Americans. On a whole nother subject, maybe we'll get into it later. It can be touchy, I know, but when we strip the color of someone's skin out or whatever the rules and laws are, there are people trying to leave governments all over the planet because governments eventually seem to be friends to their citizens. They don't cater to their citizens. They cater to the increasing and securing of power, which comes in between delivering greatness to their people. It's like one or the other. So when we look at what Trump's doing, and I'm a fan of pretty much everything he's doing. Because when you look at who else could be there doing things slightly differently, there isn't anyone, right? No one else ran. It was Kamala or him. And so just like with anything, there might be a fly in the ointment. You know, there might be a great meal at a restaurant, but the service wasn't awesome, or the service was awesome, but the food wasn't great. There's always going to be something in life where the experience isn't exactly how each one of us might like it. So we have to always come back down to an acceptance where, well, this is what we got to choose from. So I'm either going to be fully against something or fully for it, even if there's some things I don't like in the mix. When we look at what the problems are we have to deal with today, the first thing to get with is how we not necessarily gave up that power, but it was taken from us so slowly we didn't realize we were losing it. And now we live in a world today where there's cameras everywhere. Everything that we do is monitored and managed and reported on, whether we know it or not. There's agencies around the world that are spying on us and stealing our private information, which used to live in a filing cabinet, now lives in a computer that you don't have to break into the office to get access to anymore. You can do it from Russia. You can do it from some town in China where they've just set up just massive hacking armies that do nothing all day but try to break into systems. We want to talk about what made America great is the same thing that China is pursuing. So we can come to understand they aren't just going to go away. That once you get a taste of that wealth, you certainly don't want to go back and live without it. Some of us might see that the pursuit of great wealth is just a road to ruin and unhappiness, and we don't pursue that approach in life. Family means more, and closeness, and not having giant stresses on our life is something to avoid. There are many of us that pursue all that they can get. So just tying this together, the problems we're dealing with today were created long ago and along the way over the last 3 or 4 decades by our elected officials. And the threat to our way of life is not only from inside the country, but from many places outside the country that want to replace us on the world stage as the reserve currency country, but not destroy us, because they still need our consumership for their economies to work. So let's take a break, go to commercial break for a minute, play some of Shannon's commercials. And then when we come back, we'll open it up for questions on whatever you want to talk about. But if you had any insight or things that you're alarmed about, or things I may not have mentioned yet, let's bring all that to light and have a little bit of a round robin discussion about it for a bit. After a lifetime of hard work and smart investing, the last thing you want to worry about is losing your retirement savings. Hi, I'm Paul Stone, CEO of Colonial Metals Group. We specialize in helping hardworking Americans like you take back control of their financial future, safeguard their savings. In economic times like these, millions turn to physical precious metals as a form of insurance, while conventional investment choices face challenges or even collapse. If you have an IRA, 401k, or other type of retirement account, my team at Colonial Metals Group would like to help you build a financial protection plan outlining the most secure future for you. We've put together a free protection kit showing how you can start investing in precious metals 100% tax and penalty free to protect and grow your wealth. You can download it for free now by clicking the button below. Customers, we're very proud to say, across the country have been very impressed by my team's in-depth knowledge of financial history and their ability to listen to you. We hold the same conservative values you hold, and ones our great nation was built on, and we can't wait to start helping you and working with you. Again, just click the button below to download our retirement protection kit for free now. All right. So I see one here. I see a couple here. I can hardly see or read anymore. Be My Valentine. Is there still gold in Fort Knox? And then the one right below that, Mark the Reagan. So Paul is defending tariffs to a certain extent here. Yeah. So let's go to gold in Fort Knox. Probably. Probably is, because what would be the point of selling it? Where would we have sent it off to? When you think about gold is relevant when it is your money or the limiter of money. And it's I've gotten pushback and I've gotten a lot of gratitude at the same time for what I'm about to say about paper money. The recipe to our financial paper is top secret, and it's mostly 65% linen. So this isn't printer paper. Obviously, you know that. And when you feel, one of the easiest things, it's, you could tell counterfeit money when you feel it, because it just doesn't feel like the money paper that we make. Again, it's 65% linen, so it can get wet and it can stay wet for a long time. You could bury it in the ground and it just doesn't fall apart or erode. So until you have paper that can survive life itself, you got to use gold and silver as money. So when they invent the paper, that's a better way to carry gold and silver, right? So now women's purses don't weigh as much. Remember those black and white cartoons where the bad guy would creep up on an older woman, she would hit him with a purse, it'd knock him the hell out because it was full of gold and silver. These days, not so much. And guys didn't have to carry satchels anymore that jingled when we walked. We could carry a billfold. And if the paper gets messed up, it just gets, eventually the money is, you give it to a cashier and they deposit it into a bank, and the bank notices some of the bills are dog-eared or just worn out. They just send them into the Federal Reserve, they destroy them and replace them. And you want to do that with a gold or silver coin that's all messed up. You got to melt it down and remint the whole thing. It's a much more involved process. So if we think of paper as a better way to carry gold and silver, and then we think of Nixon ending the relationship between the paper and gold, then gold can just sit there. It's not relevant to our government anymore. And it's probably still sitting there in Fort Knox because, why would they sell it? They can just print money. So if the government, and you can tell now, 36 trillion in debt, if the government needed some money, it just created it out of thin air. And yeah, long ago, before Windows 95, they would print the money and they'd ship it somewhere. In modern times, one of the ways they print money is they just write a bond, and the Treasury writes a bond, Federal Reserve buys it. Now the Treasury has money, and there was no like $100 bills on a truck moving between one building to another. But printed money today is just issuing money onto an Excel spreadsheet and out into the world it goes. So I'm sure the gold's still there. There's just no point, I would think, that they would ever sell it. They certainly wouldn't want to create any noise. Like, not only did Nixon end the gold standard, and the last time the Fort Knox seems to be audited was 1974, a few years later, why would they make any noise selling the gold? They would just hold on to it. So I think it's still there. And there's also, I'll be 55 next month. So sometimes I experience some timers, but I think there's 15,000, I don't want to get this wrong, 15,000 pounds or kilos of gold in a building in New York that's heavily guarded. Google it. It's a great Wikipedia read. That's part of the New York Fed. So Fort Knox, I suppose, is part of the Federal Reserve system, but there's the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, one of the branches of the Federal Reserve, has 15,000 units of gold in the basement up there in a very special, cool building down near Wall Street. Read about it, Google it. So I'm sure there is still gold there. In my opinion, though, just to carry on with this question one more second, I think it's the people's gold. I think it's our money. I think it's our gold. And I think it should be either handed out, or there should be some kind of, it should be used in some way to benefit struggling Americans. It's just an idea. I haven't drilled all the way to the other end of it, but to me, I do believe that's the people's gold. I don't believe it's the government's gold, because at one point they did take it from us in 1933. Now there's probably a lot more gold in that vault than what they took. But to me, one, it's supposed to be the people's damn government. It's supposed to be our government. The government doesn't possess a people. We're supposed to be possessive of a government. And obviously you can see how all that's changed. So the other question was about defending tariffs. Mark the Reagan. So I'm not defending them. I'm using them to illuminate an attempt to reduce the power, influence, and leverage on a country that our stupid elected officials created a system where about $280 trillion over the last 30 years has flowed through their economy. Right? If we just take the average of their GDP from today to 1990, and we just multiply that by the amount of years that they've been rolling, 34 years, almost 35 years, we get an idea for just how much insane wealth are elected officials allowing corporate profiteers to set up manufacturing in China and give them trade secrets and technology secrets and how you make a high pressure plumbing valve and all that stuff they did no idea how to make. Now they have all that technology and knowledge. That our government created that problem, and it probably is more of a problem to smack tariffs on different countries to try and bully back against how we've been bullied for the last couple of decades. In my opinion, when it comes to the conversation on tariffs, and I'm not a trained economist or a financial advisor, but I do have some basic, when you spend a lot of time looking at the source of something, you start to understand the principles involved in all things. Not that I'm some guru, but when I look just plainly at a country's strength, is probably predicated on on how much of the stuff, how happy the people are, that tying pride back to small towns and having, 100,000 small to 50,000 small towns in a country that then makes the country a happy, wonderful place to be. Because like the Lego movie, they're all making stuff and everything is awesome. If you have kids, grandkids, you may have seen that movie. That's a little bit to me what America used to be like. We made stuff, we had troubles, we took cheap shots. There were pitfalls we trapped into once in a while. But this was a happy place to be. So in my opinion, you give all US corporations a year to cease having anything made outside of America. 1 year, and we're done. I don't care what didn't make it over the line, what our country has to go without, because the principle is if you don't cut free, when a heroin addict quits heroin, they don't just wind it down a little, or a drunk, or any addict to anything. You're overeating, you're overworking, you're oversexing, anything, you're over video gaming. It's kind of not really, you're missing that moderation gene. And so moderating and trying to stay cooperative with a bully that's communist, that has the intent to overwhelm us and make us the beta instead of the alpha. I don't know how you negotiate with that. And the health of our country probably is predicated on stuff being made here. And we'll get through everything that whatever's thrown at us. I believe the spirit of an American, which has a certain DNA to it, will make it through whatever challenges that decision would bring about. And yes, there would be tons of heartbreak and tough times to go through. Jobs would be lost. The country's revenue would shrink. It would probably have to print the rest of the money that it could to try and get through that situation, just like they printed many tens of trillions of dollars to get through 2008 from the liquidity crisis that came. That most of us probably haven't researched very much and thought maybe it was just $1 trillion for TARP, which saved General Motors and AIG, but it was a lot more than that. I think that you come up with a plan to excise us from dependencies on other countries that aren't our buddies, and that's one of the sickening things. We run $280 trillion over the last 34 years through China's economy, and we couldn't get them to be our buddy. We couldn't do a little regime change there. Obviously, it hasn't always been very successful, although it's a neat idea that I guess, certain agencies try to make attempts to do. But my God, $280 trillion over 35 years, and we couldn't make them our buddy, our ally. Imagine what the planet would be if China was a democracy and an ally, like England seems to be to us. We wouldn't need a President Trump to straighten things out and write executive orders that men shouldn't be able to compete in women's sports. So China is a problem. Our failed financial fundamentals is a giant problem. one of those eventually comes to become such a hardship, we struggle mightily to get through that one. To me, it'd be better, principally speaking, to manage to the bust rather than just have it blow up in our face. So that's where I'm coming from when we talk about tariffs. I just think tariffs is a way to try and inspire things to start being made here again, or use it as a bargaining chip to get something we want, like quit fooling around with Taiwan. Stop, I don't know exactly, but let's move on to another, and hopefully that touches. Can we buy physical gold, silver? Again, I can't see, but reading the question, I can read all caps. Paul, can we buy physical gold, silver through you, or do you just sell IRAs? Yes. So however you're converting dollars to ounces, you're writing, there's two versions of that money. There's you writing a check, and we're on the horn with you and sending FedEx to your house, and you drop the check in the FedEx envelope, and it gets here, and you're getting a consultation on gold and silver and the different types of gold and silver. And out of that conversation, your precious metals portfolio takes life and is shipped to you or shipped to a depository in an account with your name. Some folks have money, the size of money they wouldn't want or feel comfortable in their own home, but some of it. And so whatever you're uncomfortable with dollar amount wise, you might want stored by the professionals. You're trusting databases to secure your fortune and your wealth today. Those get hacked. If your money's got to be somewhere, right? So if it's in ounces, some of that's at home. If it is at home, have a throwaway safe, right? Have a safe. If some bad guys come by and they heard you had some gold and silver in the house, you can give them the throwaway safe that has just a few gold coins and some silver coins in it, and maybe $1,000 in cash, and they run out the door. You got to have a throwaway safe if you're going to have gold and silver at your house. The real safe's bolted down to the closet floor and a heap of clothes over it. If it's an uncomfortable amount of money to have at the house, then we work with depositories. There's one in Dallas, Idaho, North Dakota. Those are some of the red state depositories that we work with. And then, yes, if the other flavor of money is IRA, retirement funds, you can still have that gold and silver shipped to your home. Everything we deal with is physical. But if you make a withdrawal, and I'm not an accountant or trying to give any financial advice, but I think I've read or experienced that if you make a withdrawal from a retirement account, that's a taxable move, and that withdrawal would be taxed as ordinary income. So instead of taking possession of those funds from a retirement account, the gold and silver that you've converted dollars toward is just stored in a depository for you. And these depositories don't have anything to do with the financial system or the states that they're in. They're standalone. Just think of them as a very fancy public storage unit building with armed guards, security measures, lights out, all the high-tech security measures that there are. And when you think about, financial institutions, your money's in a database secured by people, debugging systems and fighting hackers all the time. I've seen almost every crime story, TV show that, may have been made. And there might be one in England where they actually steal gold out of a depository. Can't remember the actor's name, famous guy, but I haven't seen any other stories because the gold and silver weighs a lot. It's hard to get into a depository and run out with what you want. It's a lot easier to do it from a keyboard. And so when you just compare apples to oranges, what your options are, physical gold and silver in a depository insured by Lloyd's of London, or in a safe in your home. Buskman, Paul, I'm the average working American who knows zero about precious metal investing, and I just sat down in your office. What do you recommend as my initial steps? We do what we can. So if we have a little bit of extra money, $8,000 in a CD, whatever it is you want out of dollars and into ounces, we'll work with you. Some folks think, well, gold's outside of my range, but really, it's not necessarily about gold and silver creating a return for you. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but my opinion on gold and silver is that it's a location for money when you're worried about where it is now. Right. And so you can look at how does gold and silver perform before a crisis kicks off? And I would still say we're in pre-crisis pricing for gold and silver right now. The crisis is there. It's in the living room, but it's not destroying anything like it wants to because of the money printing. Keeps that destruction at bay. Kind of like if, there was a Rottweiler that wants to eat us alive, we've stakes we can keep throwing at it. And instead of getting to us, it stops and eats the steak. When it runs out of steak, we throw another one. Eventually we're out of steak and that Rottweiler's coming for our lives. So the money printing is keeping us, in my opinion, from feeling and witnessing and experiencing the just utter destruction we're going to go through when they can't print that money because it's a resource. And just like those resources like oil and money, it's limited. If you destroy the value of the money, you can't grow it back. It's not a renewable. Dollar's worth 3 cents. So it was once worth 100, today it's worth 3. You're almost out of time that this throwing steaks at the Rottweiler, we're almost out of steaks. And we're going to feel the fangs. So whatever money you have, you look at what gold and silver could do for you. It's just something you've got that isn't in the dollar. When the crisis goes off, historically speaking, silver seems to outrun gold. Most people are going to come to a gold and silver conversation when the heat is, when they're feeling the flames. They're not going to be too early to the gold and silver conversation. They're coming now, right? When they're like, it just doesn't look good and it hasn't looked good for a long time. And I'm tracking that trajectory. And if I were to chart that out, this thing's headed, it's in a straight nosedive and it crashes into the ground and it meets a hard stop and busts apart. I don't want my money, my savings in that dollar when it busts apart because that's the epicenter, that's ground zero for financial destruction. Anything attached to the country's currency. So when you're in gold and silver, that crisis eventually goes off. Silver has shown a much higher return post-crisis, not pre-crisis, but in the crisis itself than gold does. So lots of folks think they just get silver when they have smaller amounts of money. And the old saying, I guess, when it comes to like barter and exchange situations is silver to buy the bread and gold to buy the bakery. But either way, I've had clients with millions and millions of dollars and they load it up on silver because they've seen themselves in the charts that silver gives a bigger bang for their buck once the crisis kicks off. And the whole reason to come to precious metals is to be there before the crisis kicks off. Hope that helps. We're coming down to like 12 minutes. I see a question about a gold ETF scam. I would just say the construction of an ETF it's a financial product. Again, not a financial advisor, and don't want to stray or trespass into talking about the financial world in a way that I ought not to be. But if we just Google how is an ETF constructed, you may understand that you don't own anything. And so if it's a gold ETF and the folks don't continue to do the right thing with gold, then I don't know. I mean, if you remember during COVID, I have a quick story. And you watched oil go to negative $31 a barrel. That's the futures price of oil. And I figured it wouldn't stay there long. So I popped some funds into an account where I could take advantage of my theory that it wouldn't be there tomorrow. It would go back to normal, like $0 or $1. And I would take advantage of that and profit off of a short-term trade. And I couldn't get into the trade I wanted. So I bought OIL, which was a Barclays oil ETF. And made some money on it the next day. 3 days later, they just closed the fund. They just ended the ETF and I was sitting in cash. So it's a financial product. Gold and silver is also a product, but I carry it around with me. I possess it. It's in a safe. It exists. I'm more in control of that because I didn't have to trust anyone else. These dependencies is what we're talking about. So what I wanted to end with is when I'm talking about tariffs, I'm really just introducing the conversation to look at why, how did China get to this beast that it is, that's hostile to us and lots of the rest of the world? Because of the retaliation element. That's what I wanted to end with. So in March of 2018, Trump slaps tariffs on China. December of 2019, China releases COVID against America. And where did COVID start? Again, that old detective I used to talk to. Yeah, I can't prove it. I'm sure there is proof somewhere, But if we just look at the breadcrumbs, where did COVID first show up? Towns Chinese people like visiting: San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Italy, Paris. And I do remember, although I probably should have looked up and found, maybe a news report on it, but I remember noticing a report that the central government of Iran had a COVID problem before Iranians did. And China does lots of business with Iran. They buy all of the oil that they aren't supposed to be selling. Because again, we can't really step that hard to China and smack them around. They make all of our pharmaceuticals, right? The iPhone is made there. I mean, what phones aren't made there? All these technological devices, your laptops, your earbuds, your TVs, how much of that stuff, it's made in China. I believe Samsung is Korean, so that's made in South Korea, I believe. But when we look around at these dependencies, it traps us, and we need to cut free of those. And so when we look at for every action, there's a reaction. And if China has its own Monroe Doctrine, just like we've had ours, and they want to survive and thrive and dominate, they see that they could just do business with us for a few decades, but now it looks like they're positioned to want to take us over and make us slave to their economy and trap us in a bubble we can't get out of, because it takes guts to get out of that stuff. It takes guts. There's times where diabetics have to lose your life or lose a limb. There's tough choices, but you don't get to have both. We don't get to have flags flying and Air Force One flying over Daytona 500 if we don't preserve our autonomy. We lose that autonomy to a country like China, or a partnership of China, North Korea, maybe Saudi Arabia. Let's not forget who the hijacker, who the 9/11, pilots came from. All those terrorists. There were Saudi nationals. When we look at what really is up against us, wanting to dominate us, you got Joe Biden setting up policy of going away from oil, and Saudi Arabia drops the petrodollar relationship that we had, which was the last main stanchion in securing our dollar as something that dominated the world, that the whole world uses. It keeps slipping away in market share to where de-dollarization reaches a point where you're wrecked because the world isn't using our dollar. One of my fears is the world fractures into three zones. Anyone who's willing to deal with America, anyone who's willing to deal with China, India, Saudi Arabia, the BRICS nations, Russia, and Europe kind of stuck in the middle because they're over there and they kind of got to make nice with their neighbors. So they kind of deal with us and they kind of deal with them. And there is no reserve country anymore. And trade is a bit of a nightmare. And creating wealth and liquidity is a bit of a nightmare. And the world changes into something you're not going to like. That's where it seems to be headed. When there's a really strong America or a really strong Rome or Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, the French, or the British, then there's order to the planet. Some of that's created by force and some of it's created by, if you want access to wealth, you've got to kind of do things the way we liked you to. And when that power position is vacated, like America's has been, then the world kind of breaks apart into its own fiefdoms. And that which causes us to think that there's a possibility for pursuing happiness in our country erodes to a point where there is nothing to pursue. And that's where you all need to start looking at taking matters in your own hands. There's not going to be a revolution that's created in the way that you're used to reading about in the history books. In my opinion, the revolution will be created when the governments vacate the position they're in, because their currency ends up so worthless that the system breaks apart and then there's nothing they can do. And the one thing that they're going to be pursuing once again is that other economy where we're wondering what we're going to eat, because that's the main driver for economic activity where you and I live. How can I get what I need to live? And sustenance is the main ingredient to that. Water, sun, and something to eat, right? So when governments around the world, and they all owe $303 trillion to the planet, let that just scream in your mind that governments are never the solution. They have a track record, a perfect track record of what presides over the ruin of what the people built. Reagan said it. He said the government is not the solution, they are the problem. Einstein said the mind that creates the problem cannot possess the solution. And that is a principle. Two things can't occupy the same place at the same time. The government can't be creating a problem and a solution at the same time. They're direct opposites to each other from one mindset. And so if the track record of that mindset is if it was an NFL sports franchise, you wouldn't buy tickets. There'd be no season ticket holders. They wouldn't even be able to get a team to the field on Sundays. You wouldn't root for them. It would just be this team that never, ever, ever wins. You'd be happy when your team plays them because they're going to beat them 75-0. If we look at the government through the correct lens, not necessarily that the people are bad, but the ecosystem, the machine that it is not capable of pursuing happiness or creating an environment for you to be able to do that, then you have to create that pursuit of happiness. And the reason I'm in the precious metals business is not only this message, but one thing gold and silver does, if all the wheels fall off this thing, is it provides you, which is what saved money does, it provides you with the ability to say and do what you want with your time. Without any saved money, we're working. Without any saved money, we're working. If we're retired and have some and we lose it, then we're back to working. Or in the next version of human existence in this country, on the other side of what looks like an epic and final bankruptcy that would give you your country back in many ways because the government isn't the government anymore. They aren't going to those jobs anymore. They're not debugging your software systems anymore. They're not shooting movies and creating new TV content anymore because everyone's wondering what to eat. The supply chain, and I'll end with this. The supply chain used to be 100 years ago, 80% of our economy came from farming. About 150 million people, this is about 50 years ago, lived in cities. Today, 255 million people live in cities. They don't even know where the food comes from. And the ability to eat strawberries in December means you're doing trade with some place south of the equator. And what does it take to get strawberries to your grocery store in December? It takes diesel. If everybody, these diesel truck drivers, these cargo ship captains are wondering what they're going to eat tomorrow, they're not hopping in their rigs. They're not making deliveries. This is how precarious the situation has become. So when that last straw breaks the camel's back, there ain't going to be any deliveries because they're wondering what their family's going to eat. And as the dollar reaches, it's always a double threat. And as the dollar reaches zero, the economists that I've studied, which no one's arguing against, by the way, talk about hyperinflation setting off. Hyperinflation is where but given by their examples, the Fed would have to raise rates to 40%. 40. Hyperinflation is a firestorm that rages through your economy and burns the componentry to your economy to the ground. It means you wouldn't even come close to your paycheck covering the grocery bill for a week or a day. That a coffee would be like $30. So if coffee's $30, a steak is $500, milk is $50, eggs are $100, are you going to work? And I'm not trying to make this up. I'm just following the mathematical breadcrumbs that our government has been laying out there as they pay our bills with money that isn't money. They're destroying the resource of our money, the dollar, and eventually that thing hits half a penny, a tenth of a penny, a hundredth of a penny. It never actually hits zero, unless it's just like Confederate money, which isn't used anymore. The money of the South from the Civil War. So when we look at things that way, that's the alarm bell that ought to be ringing. And again, you might say, well, that's 20 years off, Paul. Does that happen in our lifetime? Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but looking at the math and the burn rate, you ever heard of that term before when a company's new and it burns through $1 billion a quarter, like when Uber started, they were just burning money that was given to them by investors. They didn't turn a profit until maybe a few years ago. So when you look at the burn rate of our government, if that was a financial entity that doesn't operate in the black, it operates in the red. And I know we're out of time. Then then there's 3 pennies left in the dollar. There was 56 pennies in the dollar in the year 2000. It's losing 2 cents of buying power on average a year. We're pretty close to this thing kicking off. And then you say, but Trump's president, he wouldn't allow that to happen. I'm sure the Romans weren't intending to let the bankruptcy of Rome happen, or the Portuguese, or the Dutch, or the French, or the British. Nor would we want it to happen. But there seems to be things that man does that Mother Nature doesn't agree with. And then we get smacked around because of our stupid decisions, that we're dishonoring the reality of what Mother Nature sets in place for us to have to abide by. So we want to look at, how do we make sure we do what we can for continuity in our lives to continue on, things we're used to happening. And financial autonomy is one of the elements to preserving that. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I know it's probably better when Shannon gets to talk some and her bright spirit and incredibleness is on display. And hopefully I didn't bore anyone. And I hope I didn't come off as lecturing. And I hope what I covered made sense in the hour that we had. Thank you for putting up with me, and thanks for tuning in to the Shannon Joy Show.